Thank you all for coming out to this. It's great to see so many people. I want to thank Artists in Action for inviting me to do this, and Salem Art Association for adding their invitation, and the Salem Poetry Project for showing up, even though there's cancellation involved. I have a basic outline for the next hour, but know that you can jump in with questions at any time. I've said this before, I'm not somebody who tries to hide the secrets of how I make art. I will tell you everything, anything you want to know. The 40 years of things that I've learned from artists who have shared with me. So I'm more than happy to do that as we move through the material. But if I time this right, we might be able to wander around after and you can ask about specific paintings. And you may not know which of those paintings will be the paintings you choose, but after I speak about the art, that might trigger some questions about certain pieces. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I want to do is, in addition to thanking Salem Art Association, Artists in Action, I also want to thank, I don't think they're here, but I want to thank the suppliers that make this possible. So the art department has been providing me with paint, Gamblin paint, and mediums, and structures since the art department was located where Amadeus is now. It's been a long time, and they're great. They have new management, and it just continues in the tradition of being a great store. American Easel, located here in Salem, sells their easels and their panels to the art department. Almost all of these paintings are on American Easel panels, and it's locally owned, which is cool, but you can buy them anywhere in the country. And they're very supportive of artists. Of course, also our framing has helped me in a pinch, as has Affordable Framing. And I think we have a great community of artists and people that are trying to promote art in our city of Salem, which is not particularly known for art, but there's a lot of us hiding here. And I think that makes it really cool because we know each other and we support each other. I want to tell you a little bit about the way the show is organized. There are some missing pieces of information that will hopefully be up in the next week, because I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of different kinds of art in here. I painted all that. So why would I put up a show that has such diversity? Well, the truth is, after we talk today, you'll see that there's a thread that moves through them. But the way it's basically organized is to be educational as well as an exhibit. That's what Salem Art Association does. They try to educate the public about art, youth, and adults as well. So in that room over here, the side room, you will see some oil sketches. They're monochromatic, starting pieces. So that is how these paintings begin, with charcoal and sepia toned or asphaltum sketches. And I wanted to leave some of them as sketches so people can see the beginnings of these. And then the pieces move to landscape with color, and some of them I introduce the figure. And at the end of the day, oil paint will stay pliable and workable for a couple of days, but eventually it starts to get a skin on it and it starts to harden. When it does that, I can't use it. So I start moving it around on panels, and I create timelines for those abstract pieces that are in the other room. So the work goes from oil sketches all the way through completion, and when whatever's left starts getting wiped on panels. And so those pieces are journals of the color that I used when I made these paintings. So they're the accumulation of that paint, and then I try to compose a piece that is, I think, worthy as a non-objective abstract. So that information is missing. We've got it written up, we just don't have it on the walls yet. And I'll go into greater detail. what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about my background, which informs and influences this art. And I'm going to then talk about my influences, the people who have inspired or helped me, local and historical. And then I'm going to talk about why I make art, and then what I make, and then how I make that art. And that should take about 45, 50 minutes. I mean, we can do more Q&A, anything that doesn't get covered during the presentation. And we can walk around. So I'll hang out. I think we have till 8:30. And you have specific, I've seen some of you get really close to these paintings, so I know you have questions about pencil marks or whatever you're seeing. I'm happy to answer. All right, let's start with background. I started painting when I was 7 years old. My father is an artist, and he's 92 and he's still painting. His father was an artist, his aunt was an artist, and as far as I can tell, there were artists in every generation. And he made sure I had a studio to work in. He was the dreamer, so he constantly said, you know, if you just want to do it, do it. My mom was the practical person, and she said, yeah, but you should probably have a better plan. And so I was raised by both these people. And then they divorced and got remarried. Her to an even more practical person, my stepdad, and my father to my stepmother, who is kind of a mix of all of it. And so I think this is important because this is going to tell you how I got here, I guess. And they have all had tremendous influence on my work ethic and my creativity and my license to do what I want to do at the same time being smart and having a backup plan. So what happened is I, made it through high school. I don't remember much of it. It was the 70s, and I wasn't particularly interested in anything except painting. I had a great art teacher. My senior year, I could have graduated early, and instead I took all the art electives, and I ended up graduating early anyway. But I had this great art teacher, and he had been an illustrator for Disney. And he was kind of a curmudgeon. He actually was a pretty mean dude, but what he would do is he would give very constructive criticism with love. You just didn't know there was love tied to it. There was no criticism, but it drove me, and I was determined to pull A's in his class. And sometimes that's what's necessary with me. You kind of have to piss me off, and then eventually I'll come back around. So these are the people that got me through high school. And I went to college and I studied pre-law. And then there was no internet, but if you were in the library, you could go to journals and you could read about things that lawyers were written, and I couldn't have been more bored. And so I changed my major to illustration, and I did do that for a while, graphic art and illustration, but that's tough work. You have to create on a deadline, and you have to create what people pay you to create. You don't get to kind of think your own way through that unless you're one of the big names. So then I eventually switched over to fine art, painting, and printmaking at Brigham Young University, which had one of the 3 art programs that taught foundation art in the 70s. So if you wanted to learn to draw, if you wanted to learn craft and perfect that craft, I really had to go to one of these 3 universities. The rest of the universities kind of leaned toward conceptual art and didn't have the level of discipline that I was seeking. I wanted to be excellent at drawing hands, and that is what they taught you to do. Again, a faculty full of mean people who would often flip your work on the floor and walk right over the top of it. With love, apparently. By the time you graduate, they would start to be nice to you. But they taught you how to keep moving. And they required 1,000 hands and 1,000 faces and 1,000 arms and 1,000 feet before you could paint anything. It made you work. And I ended up graduating with the degree BFA in painting and printmaking, intaglio printmaking, but I had a backup plan. And so I also had a minor in psychology. This is my mom talking now, right? And she was a counselor and also a principal in high school. And so I was married, a child coming son, and I thought, the income from making art is, it's there. If you work, you can do it, but it's not something that's very reliable. And I felt compelled to make sure this young human would have opportunity. And I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, I enjoyed kind of a middle class lifestyle. So I went back to school, graduate work, and I got some degrees in educational psychology. And my goal was to keep both careers going at the same time. And so I went into school psychology, which allows you to have your summers free. And I then started both careers in Coos Bay, Oregon, working in the summers pretty heavily, making a lot of paintings or getting them started. And then during the school year, I would get up at about 4 in the morning and paint a couple hours. I would go to work, do my school site stuff. So these careers, they kind of move forward at the same time. And in the mid-90s, Antoinette Hatfield, do you know who Antoinette Hatfield is? So Mark Hatfield was retiring, and Antoinette was peddling art in Washington, D.C., and she started a gallery in Portland. And Michael Gibbons introduced me to her, and Antoinette launched my career. She really launched my career. She had all these Republicans with blank walls, and they would write her checks if she even showed up at their door. Because if you want to know why Mark Hatfield was successful, there are a lot of reasons, but Antoinette was the biggest reason. And she could get money anywhere. So she would take my paintings and everybody else in her gallery, and she would hang them on the walls, on these blank walls in these Republican homes in Portland, and hold her hand out and they would write checks. And it was a wonderful launch. Everyone should be so fortunate. I'm just very fortunate that she did that for me. I did have the pleasure of hanging one show with Mark Hatfield. I showed up with all my art, and she said, "I'm going to lunch, but Mark's going to come in and help." You mean the honor of Mark Hatfield? Yes. And so he held the ladder while I hung my show in the Antoinette Hatfield Gallery in Portland. And from that point on, I moved. Most of my paintings were still lifes, landscapes, and some figures. At the same time, I was recruited to create a system of violence prevention for the Salem Kaiser School District, for the most part. Now it is referred to as the Salem Kaiser Cascade Model. That violence prevention system was for gang violence, but primarily it was for mass shootings and school shootings. And so that's why I brought this iced tea up here. It's nice. So that career moved forward along with the art career. And that is kind of how I ended my last 23 years in the district, is working that model and building it and then exporting it around the country. And it is a model that is one of the 3 models that are used for violence prevention in schools in the United States and other areas as well. The reason I bring that up is because that is some heavy, heavy work to do that. And I will not tell you that painting was my respite. It actually wasn't, because painting is work. If you do it right, you are working, you are solving math problems, you're highly frustrated most of the time. Am I right? Mm-hmm. And you want to quit. So it was most definitely not. Thank you. And that's just water. Just coffee. But it's not particularly relaxing. What ended up being my respite was making music, learning to play music and writing music and poetry. And I started writing poetry when I was in my 20s, but I didn't share it with anyone, and I really didn't do much with it until about 10 years ago when I met Eleanor and the gang back here for the Salem, or for the Mid-Valley Poet Society. Now, I was sending out to publications and doing that sort of thing, that poetry has really been the respite for me. It's been the place I go, and it's often the people I get to talk to about it, and the sharing of that poetry that brings me peace. It's a kind of therapy for me. And it's very satisfying because it's never done. It's never done. You just keep writing and writing and writing and writing. And neither are these paintings. I can, of course, I see all the mistakes in all of them, but at some point they have to go to market. Music is also a part of my life. I started playing music when I was 48, and I've graduated to be a mediocre keyboard player in a bar band, but it's a blast. And now we basically playing wineries. But all of that comes together. This is what I wanted to point out. It seems like if you do these many things, that you would be exhausted, that you wouldn't sleep, that they would draw from the other thing. And it is not true. Those of you who've dabbled in the world of brain science and neurological studies of the brain know that the brain lights up for certain things. And if it's lit up, if you do another task that's creative, you're already 50% in. So when I wake up and I play the piano for 45 minutes and I write a few lines of poetry and I read something that is enriching, and then I paint, it actually takes me less time to paint and get the results that would normally take more time, because my brain's already been lit up, and the part and the creativity that goes with those other activities informs the part of the brain that is trying to solve a color formula, then mute it, then subtract it, then add it back in subtlety, which is exactly what you're doing when you write poetry, which is exactly what you're doing when you're trying to play music and not provide too much sound. And so all of these things have come together and energized me. And this particular show is actually something I started a few years ago. I retired in 2019, and I started my own company consulting on this violence prevention. So I didn't get a lot of painting time in, but a couple of years ago, I started taking on subcontractors, and it allowed me to paint. And so I got these paintings going. And the way this worked is I wanted to do these figure pieces, and I had most of them started, but I needed to place the figure in a landscape. I had never done that before. I'd always placed the figure in a studio setting. If you're familiar with my figure painting, it's very Dutch realism. It's controlled light. I wanted to try putting humans in an environment, but I needed to return to the landscape in order to do that. Now, I think I told you a minute ago that in the 90s and the early aughts, I painted a lot of landscapes. I painted so many that I thought I would never paint another one again. I was sick to death of painting them. But once I started doing these small studies for these paintings, I started enjoying painting landscapes again. Lo and behold, a year and a half later, there should be about 42 landscapes on the wall that weren't going to happen. They happened because I lost interest in these. I was able to finish them, and I moved over to actually creating these landscapes. And I'm going to talk about philosophy and how to and all that here. But that's how this show came to be. With that body of work, obviously we had some discussions with Salem Art Association, and they were interested in painting all of this. The timeline panels and oil sketches were an afterthought because we wanted to make it educational. But it all hopefully will be cohesive by the end of this presentation. All right. Any questions about any of that weird stuff? Yes.
Did you have live models for your own figures, or?
Yes, but I photographed them. So I'll jump ahead. These paintings are 60, 80-hour paintings. These are much less. I can't get somebody to stand in an athletic pose that long, or can I pay them that long? So I take the photographs and bring them in. My poor wife has had to step in and remodel that half of these. But I do paint mostly from photograph and controlled light. Someday it'll be really cool to be able to have a live model the entire time. It would be. There are artists that can afford to do that.
But you place them in the environment of them.
So I light them with a black backdrop, and that allows me to then place the landscapes behind them. So I light them directly as if that source is here. But when I get to talking about the influences, luminism and tonalism, you'll understand why that light source, that muted light source in the background is there, that kind of misty atmospheric feel. Okay. Anything else? Yeah, Jess.
Do they have a red ribbon, or do you imagine that on top of it?
Yeah, I had a red ribbon.
Yeah, so you just do that.
Yeah, I did. It's be hard to pull that off because the ribbon, I'll get to that a little bit later, but the ribbon is a motif and a symbol and a design to guide your eye. So if I had cast the ribbon to take the picture, it would never have done what I wanted to do. So I painted so many still lifes, many of which have that red ribbon, that I can make that up. That one is easy for me, as long as I know my light source. And it's just a tip of the hat to one of the greatest American painters and his wife. His father, N.C. Wyeth, was one of the greatest American illustrators, and he often used a red sash as a motif and as a focal point. The Byzantine artists and some of the Renaissance artists used red, and especially the idea of blood, atonement. I don't use it that way, that it does and can symbolize that kind of thing. It can be whatever you want it to be, but it is a motif to help guide and design the piece.
Well, it also gives it movement.
Yeah, it definitely does. It gives it an energy that some of these pieces need. Yeah. Any other questions?
Sorry. Do you make the figure on top of the finished landscape?
It goes at the same time. So the sepia color monochromatic paintings, that's how they all start. And then I start building, pushing and pulling, sanding, doing minimal work, and then adding and subtracting, and just think about the poems that you write. You put a bunch of words down and you think, I'm going to get rid of this one, this one, this one, this one, and that's what I do. And you can actually see the sandpaper work on some of these I've left them in, where I sanded out sections. So that all happens at the same time, using these kind of studies to inform. Okay, influences. Well, most of my heroes are local. I'll talk about the historic ones, but I do want to mention some folks that I'm sure many of you know. First of all the artists in action artists, are awesome. And listen, I didn't into something right now. No, Picasso and T.S. Eliot admitted to it when they said, good poets borrow and great poets steal. I steal ideas from people. I borrow ideas from people. I do it in everything I do. I don't think anyone's free of not doing that. I think everybody does that. It's hard to find a new idea. And so if I see something in a painting, I make a note of it. And I let that inspire and inform my work. Of course, I change it as I move forward. One of my favorite things to do is to start a poem with a line from another poem and write into that and get rid of that line. So some of my local heroes, Irene is here today. There she is back there. So support of the arts. Also, she makes the most delightful paintings that she hides in her house. None of us get to see. One of my heroes, of course, is Irene Lonnie back there. And John Colbert, who can't be here right now, partly because he gets the same effect I do in here from the echoes. Can't hear well. It's hard to be in a space like this. All of Salem Art Association's people and all of their hard work. Dan May, the late Dan May, is an inspiration to me, and not that I even attempt to do what he does, but his lifestyle and the way he was a true minimalist and devoted to his craft, and how he struggled with his own angst and managed to move past that. Gary Westford's not here. If you had a chance to see his paintings, and they're just sort of amazing. Rob Bidler, impeccable skill. Rob Stederhalf, Carol Hauser. If you want to study somebody who knows color, Carol's work is amazing. If you've seen Kelly James' photography, he's an artist as a photographer. The late Susan Trueblood Stewart, who we lost last year, was an inspiration with her acrylics and watercolors. She did, yes.
When was that?
Last year in Seattle. Jonathan Bucci, who has had shows here, uses form like no one else. He just knows how to create formal structures that speak for themselves. Jed Thomas, who moved away back to Utah for Jed, that his painterly work. Paula Booth is not here today. She uses structures and mixed media and just does amazing things. She works out at Western Oregon. Jody Garrison is an instructor at Western Oregon, uses color just vibrantly. April Waters, who's had a show here. It's incredible precision in painting. Her partner, Nathan Good's architecture is, I don't even know how to describe this other than it certainly transcends just building stuff. He's an amazing architect. He's got a great eye. He does these green designs. Tim Knight, for those of you who know TK, he has created primitive images. John Naylor, who you'll see his work around town, has an attack and release approach. Bonnie Hull's mark making. Dana Collins is also a great colorist. Kristen Kuhn's structured approach to mixed media. I hope all these names are familiar. These are great people in the community and people that have, that inspired me. The late Roger Hull's ability to write about artists is an absolute pearl of our community. Art leadership like John Olbrunz, Chris Darcy, Mary Lou Zeke, and Rachel Lucci and Trick here. John Edmonds has a great writer in precision. Julian Snow, a great musician. The guys in my band, and then of course Eleanor Berry and the crew from Mid Valley Poet Society and Salem Art or Salem Poetry Project. My wife back here, Colleen, who's already bored with what I'm saying because I can talk about it all the time at home. She has an innate ability to place things next to them, each other in an aesthetic way. I've never seen anybody do how to do that. Some of you have been in my home. That's all what she does. She just knows how to put this with that, and it's perfect. And then all of my friends who, of course, give me their time, patience, and alcoholic beverages and entertainment. So now my historic influences. We start with the Greeks of antiquity and their idealism. The Greeks perfected skill. That was what they did. That was that higher order of craft. But what I appreciate, not just how they influenced the Renaissance, because I'm going to talk about the Renaissance, but they also gave us a philosophy called Stoicism. And those of you who are familiar with Stoicism already know this. Those of you who are not probably think I'm talking about the character Spock from Star Trek. That is not Stoicism. Stoicism is a philosophy that helps you deal with life, anxiety, the here and now, accept what you can't control, and then control what you can, which is your thoughts and judgments. Why is this important to an artist or a poet or a musician? Because we suffer tremendous anxiety. How will people receive our work? Will they like our work? Can we make money doing this? Why am I even doing this? This is mostly frustrating. That's the stuff we deal with every day. And the philosophy of Stoicism has helped me just pretty much say, so what? What I want to do today is tackle these marks and this color and try to transform this into a composition that will evoke some sort of harmonious reaction with the viewer, that they will personalize it and it will become rich and inspiring to them. That's all I want to try to do today. I don't know what tomorrow brings because tomorrow is anxiety and the past is depression. I stay right here. So the philosophy of Stoicism offers that. Now I sound like a missionary. Philosophy of Stoicism is not a religion, it is a philosophy. But it has helped me tremendously. And I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about the content, the extent of this work, and hopefully you'll see how that plays out, because that's built into this. The way I think, the way I'm coached to think by the Stoics. Helps me stay grounded. Here's the other thing Stoicism does. You don't have to raise your hand. And if you're an artist or a poet or a musician, there's a chance you have a big ego or a very fragile ego. So what it does is it helps us not feed our ego with narcissistic adventures, because that's what we want. That's what we think about as artists. We think about greatness. And the philosophy of Stoicism grounds us. It just says, do your best right now. Make the thing that you're trying to make, and that's good enough. So it doesn't feed our narcissism as artists. I mean, if you clinically, just I don't know if you know this, clinically, artistic people, poets, musicians, photographers, writers, musicians, tend to lean a little more into narcissism than the rest of the population. There tends to be a little more of a fire there, so it's helpful. My next influence is the Northern European realists of the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, Vermeer, the Dutch realist, and then the 20th century American realists. And why? Not because they were great painters, they absolutely were, but because they tried to paint mundane things and make them interesting. They stayed away from the sensationalism of religious painting, like some of the Spanish and the Italian Renaissance painters, and they just tried to, make a painting of someone in a kitchen cutting a loaf of bread and make that meaningful so that you could find that the form and the structure and the spirit of the painting would speak to you. And I think that's a tall order. When you don't have a magnificent fantasy kind of topic and you have to do something with everyday life, that's pretty challenging. So those folks have definitely inspired me. Luminism, which was a movement that came out of the Hudson River School and was titled Luminism later. Luminism is using light, somewhat muted light, but actually like composing geometric shapes, which are landscapes and seascapes with luminism, and using a clarity of light that will project that light, but you don't always see the source. And the luminists, many of the luminists turned into tonalists, and they muted the light. They took low key color, and they took these luminous paintings, and then they toned them. So think of tonalism as this. You get your painting out there, you'll see again these monochromatic pieces in the other room, and you start laying down sheets of colored glass, stained glass, over the top of it. And each of those sheets will influence your eye and your brain to see color a different way. And what the tonalists did is they thought, well, the luminists are great. They've got these color harmonies, but we're going to mute it with these sheets of color, not literally stained glass, but glazes of translucent color, transparent color that will influence the entire painting. That's very tricky, because you can make a painting that looks pretty drab and depressing if you're not careful. But if you want to know who did this very well, George Jennis, Whistler, and contemporaries like Michael Workman and Bruce Brainerd, two gentlemen I was lucky enough to go to school with. And tonalism and luminism in the late 1800s gave way to Impressionism. Now, these are not Impressionist paintings, but I do utilize some of the strategies of the Impressionists. Color juxtaposed next to other colors to make vibrancy. Sometimes those are complementary colors. Not all of these pieces do that. Some of these are luminous pieces, some of these are toneless pieces, and some of them have a touch of that Impressionism. To try to get color to kind of vibrate and those, so color basically is light waves going into your brain. Could be waves, could be particles. We could get into that whole science if we wanted to, but it goes into your brain and you make sense of it. And manipulating that color and capturing it is key. And so the luminists and the tonalists and the Impressionists did that in very different ways. And what I've done with these paintings is I've kind of wandered back and forth. I only borrow a little bit from the Impressionists, just a tiny bit, and that is the freely brushed color that you'll see in some of these, not all of these, and then aligning those complementary colors. Any questions about that? All right, now let me then talk a little bit about the philosophy that inspires me, that art philosophy. So I'm going to break this down very simply. Pre-modernist art and modernist art. Okay, now there's lots of other, kind of subcategories, but I want to talk about the two and why one is more important to this work while borrowing from the other. So the pre-modernist happened, before Impressionism, really, and Impressionism was kind of a step towards modernism. But the pre-modernist goal was not to create anything new, but to impersonate and copy nature in a novel way, recognizing the beauty of nature and also human form and how human beings touch the world. And then do that in a way that could create a sublime, that could engage the individual very personally so that there was an experience that could even be spiritual. The pre-modernist painter is a craft person. They're craftsmen. They want to be the best they can be at doing the work. And the pre-modernist is very interested in the colors of nature. So they used, and those that are paint this way, such as myself, use a mineral palette. The colors I use are found in nature. They come from the minerals of nature. It's not a modern palette. So it's not the neons and the bright colors. These are colors that are only found in nature and created from nature. They want the viewer to have a common experience, to basically find these things that are held in common between human beings and then describe them and paint them in a way that shows that they've indulged in the process, that they've become absolutely obsessed with the process of painting and doing that. It's very personal to the pre-modern painter to do that. Skill, craft, reporting, and creating a common experience. Here's the good news about pre-modern painting. It's low maintenance. It's self-evident. If it's good, it's good. It doesn't require a cultural elite to describe it or explain it to the rest of the population. Modernism, with its moves in tow like postmodernism and pop, is a different kind of art. Artists in modernism are not just craftsmen or people that are doing a job, but they somehow, in the late 1800s and 1900s, they became prophetic, iconoclasts. They challenged religion. They painted for social and political reasons or to express emotion. Emotion that was important to the aesthetic because they thought so, not because it actually was to the viewer. So it needed someone to explain why it was important. A high maintenance form of art. I love modernism, but it's a different kind of art. They became the redemptive conscience of society in many ways. Now, I'm not comfortable being that person. That's why I don't lean that direction. But in the modernist style, beauty isn't necessarily chosen. The chosen becomes beautiful. And the chosen is often chosen by a cultural elite. In pre-modernism, beauty and aesthetics and the sublime is self-evident, and you choose it. That's why they're very different. The reason I bring this up is I do have pieces that fit into modernism, and those would be my timelines. But one of the problems with what's going on in the art world today is that a lot of folks in the community just don't get it. And they've been alienated from art because of some of that cultural elitism. Not that the modernist art is bad, it's that attitude that goes with it can put people off. And so I'm a Bakersfield boy from an oaky town. I worked in the oil fields. I want to speak to people, regular people. I want my art to translate that way. And I love making abstract pieces, but what I really want to do is make that connection from a pre-modernist concept. And so most of my work and my philosophy really falls into the idea that I'm a craftsman. I want to do this well. I want to represent something. Now, that's not to say that I don't come up with some novel ideas along the way, but what I want to do is build something that people can relate to so that it's self-evident, so that the beauty is there. Why do I do this? Well, I'm going to share with you that I have no desire to be original, to find truth, or novelty. I want to be engrossed in the process. I want to depict nature, beauty, human beings in a way that can be reinvented by me, that can be changed. I can take a real landscape and rearrange it. But I needed to speak to you. I wanted to speak to people so that our common denominators as human beings can be represented in that art. And when you look at these timelines of it, you may get lost in some of them because they don't really do that. But the rest of this work should. Going to depth, becoming engrossed in the process. My whole career as an artist has been to find that higher form of craft and indulging myself in this process. So at the end of the day, I want this work to be very personal to the people who look at it. So it's not that it's painted for social reasons or the community. It's painted for the individual to have that experience with me. And there's a sensuality to the work, to the brush strokes. I want that color harmony to happen. I want the compositions to happen. I want to work with form in traditional ways that are pleasing to the eye aesthetically. And so philosophically, I carry that with me. And those of you who heard me speak at the awards for Salem Art Association, I mentioned that craftsmanship was very important to me as a judge. You know, people respect the medium they're working with, and they respect the viewer. That the viewer wants to see something that's finished and well presented. At the end of the day, that evoking of that experience is really more for sentiment, not sentimentality. So I want the emotional reaction, but I don't want it to be over the top. I don't want it to be messagey. How do I do this? Well, about 95% of this is sweat, and 5% is inspiration. If I waited for inspiration to find me before I painted, I would never make a painting. It would never happen. I have to be doing the work to fill the groove. And I firmly believe that with poetry and art and music. The key is showing up at work, showing up at the studio, showing up and getting started. And eventually you'll feel that flow. Some of those endorphins will kick in. And some of that successful creativity that will allow you to deal with the frustration that you have from failing along the way will kick in. But that's showing up to work. I know there are people that believe they can't get in the studio or start writing until they feel inspired. I can't imagine that. I would never get anything done. I just have to start sweating it out. And if I'm lucky, 5% of it kind of comes from somewhere. And then I feel it. That's a great feeling. But I think surviving in the world of art and writing is really surviving in a world where you're constantly frustrated and failing. And you know it. Now, other people may not know it because they think, hey, no, that looks great. But you know that you know where all the mistakes are, and you know how you got there and how many times you sanded back and scraped back the paint in order to get what you want. Honestly, we've just reduced this being successful as an artist to a formula. It's show up at work, show up at work and your work is in the studio and start working. Just start working. If you're too tired of work and you're bummed out, clean your studio. Eventually, organize your studio. And eventually you'll pick up a piece and kind of think, you know, I'm just gonna noodle with this a little bit. I'm gonna do a little color and work on it. Before you know it, you're painting, you're writing, or you're doing all these things. What I do, and I'll use some examples here after I'm done talking, so you can see how I've built these structures. But I use a wood panel most of the time, sometimes canvas, and I sketch into it, and then I sand part of that away, and then I start painting into it. And I've tried to build these translucent surfaces, many of which have flaws and abrasions that you're going to see. If you get up close to these paintings, you're going to see the flaws and the abrasions, and the sand marks, and the places that I've fixed or removed or added. And those abrasions actually end up kind of creating a texture that I can build on. And so when I go back to looking at nature, by nature, I forgot to tell you this, these are not wilderness paintings. These are rural landscapes. This is nature as human beings have arranged it. And then I rearranged on a canvas. And as I scratch, you'll see the scrape marks, you'll see the sand marks. Something evident will come forward that is either a mark that can be built on. That could end up a motif, it could end up something more literal like a tree or a figurative representation of a tree, or it could just be texture that you don't know is there until you really look closely. But as a craftsman, I build that texture layer upon layer of oil paint. Some of it gets sanded back off. Most of these layers are very thin, translucent layers. Most of these paintings have 10 to 20 layers of paint. Some of them have 30 or 40. And we go back to the idea of sheets of stained glass. I'll lay a color over, and then I'll subtract back what I don't want. I'll start removing it either with a brush or with a rag or with sandpaper later until I can get very, very thin layers of stained glass, so to speak.
Is the paint at this point mixed with any kind of extender or medium?
Yeah, so I usually start without, I put a grisaille down, so just a tone on the canvas, put it down to change the white substructure to an earth red, something neutral. And then I paint pretty directly with asphaltum, which is Van Dyke brown, but just more translucent. That's gamelin color. As time goes on, I start mixing in Galkit mediums, which are made from alkyd-based, so you don't get the ridiculous headache because you're huffing turpentine. You get a much different experience with alkyd-based mediums. And so I do add mediums in. When I do the glaze, which is the sheets of stained glass, those are always mixed heavily with the medium. So if you're not familiar with gamelin products or Galkyd, Liquin, sound familiar? Liquin, that's another version of an alkyd-based medium. And I don't like Liquin. I have bad experience with it. It ruined some of my paintings. Alligator, they bubbled. So that's when I switched to gamelin. But yes, I start mixing in mediums. And a lot of that depends on whether I want brush strokes. So too much medium, you lose your brush strokes. So a lot of that would depend. You can see some of these have more brush strokes. That's why I painted very directly. These are not painted plein air. These are painted in the studio from photographs that I take driving around the countryside, over 1,000 of them, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. But this process allows me to capture light. So I'm not painting light. I'm using these thin layers of different color. Get up close to some of these, you're going to see a lot of colors. So the way this works mechanically with your eye is that the light goes through all of those colors. And the more transparent or translucent the light passes through, changes the frequency of that light. Light is either operating as a wave or a particle. It's on how you measure it. But it will go through until it finally hits an opaque color or the white substructure. And then it will bounce back through all those layers of paint, and your receptor cones in your eye will pick up that light, and it will tell your brain what you're seeing. And you may say, oh, well, that's a blue sky. But then get up close and really look at it. It's not blue, it's green, it's yellow, it's purple. And those are the layers of color that change that light wave as it goes through, so that your brain can read it just upon first impression a certain way. But if you study it, you'll see dozens of different color formulas next to each other, and even playful to some point to create that vibrancy that will just translate as the reflection on water, for example. These paintings are really abstract paintings if you get up close. They're really not paintings of any particular thing. They're subtractive processes where I've scraped back the tree forms. Many of those are scraped back and brushed out or sanded back to the ground beneath the paint. And they fall into abstraction the closer you get. So capturing light is extremely important to painting, that especially if you're a luminist or a tonalist. Capturing character and spirit, which not in any metaphysical sense, but the spirit of the piece as a successful piece is important. That the images are worked and reworked, and that from a formal level, form, not like not formal as in wearing a tuxedo, but the form of the work has to be first and foremost important. That you experience it formally and it speaks to you visually. That is, you cannot put words to that. That's a formal reaction that you'll have in your brain. And after that, a figural level. That the images are revealing either of the human body or of the environment that humans have touched. So the figural, in other words, speaking figuratively, not literally, but the figural aspects of the piece is important. And then the craftsmanship is important. That as a viewer, you experience the craftsmanship and the dedication to that craftsmanship. The attempt to create or execute something with finesse and respect to the medium. And then, and only then, the narrative. Subtly, the figure pieces have more of a narrative, clearly. But I don't want that narrative to become illustrative or messaging. I don't want the narrative to overpower the form, or it stops being a painting and it becomes an advertisement. And that's tricky, especially for people who paint with strong narrative, to try to stay away from the message to make sure that the form actually communicates. The greatest example of that is Guernica by Pablo Picasso, which is very much a political statement about Blitzkrieg. That if you just slightly squint your eyes and look at that painting, it is an absolute formal masterpiece, absent of any message. It works that way. Fifth, you want the piece to be successful as an ongoing impression. And as I said, I want this to be individual. I want this to engage the individual in a private, sensual, and personal way. I'm not trying to send anybody any particular message here, other than I want to connect and indulge in visual art. Any questions? Yes.
You said earlier that you stick with mineral colors. I think, could you tell us a little more about the palette you use?
So a mineral palette would be your cadmiums. In fact, if you just go to art department, they have literature next to the Gamlin products. And when you open the paints, they'll show you what the mineral palette is and what the modern palette is. And so the mineral palette basically means that any color in that palette is a color you would definitely see in nature. And many of those colors are made from minerals and ground up bones and things from nature that give it the color. A modern palette has more of a synthetic look to it, so you see it in more two-dimensional art. It would be hard to use a modern palette. I could never use a modern palette with these pieces. But you know, abstract painters will use modern palettes. Or really, people who like bold. It's the way I would describe it is a modern palette is more fluorescent. It looks like invented color rather than natural color.
So more dye colors. Oh,
You mean mineral or modern?
no, you as opposed to mineral. Where you're talking a modern, more modern approach would use dye colors instead, or like the phthalo colors and.
I think phthalo is part of the mineral palette.
Is that a Miller?
I think I don't use phthalo, but I might be. The phthalo is an awfully bold, powerful
Really
blue.
intense, yeah.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah. And like dye colors that lean to the neon, like, you know, hot pink.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. That's another one I don't use. It doesn't show up in my, yeah. And that's not a criticism of those colors, but, my palette is a mineral palette. It's what I'm most comfortable. Even those pieces over there are all taken from the mineral palette, the abstracts.
We were having a conversation about the greens that you use and wondering what greens.
Greens are sap green. I use so I do use 1 gram color. And that green, it just takes forever to dry though, because it's walnut based. Drawing a blank, I'll think of that green. But sap green is earth green, those are the olive greens. And actually a lot of those greens are yellows mixed with blues. They're glazes of yellow over blues, or blues over yellows. And so, but my blues are pretty much ultramarine blue, Prussian blue, and what's the turquoise? I love it. It's just,
Cerulean.
what is it?
Cerulean.
Cerulean blue. Yeah, I love cerulean. Other questions? Right here.
Your figures don't have faces. I was wondering, is that part of the deliberate non-messaging, or is there another way you want us to interact with that?
I think that's exactly what it is. I can't give you the face. I don't want you to think this is somebody you might recognize because they're figuratively painted and they're figural because they're not literal representations of Paula, you know. But also I have painted the figure with you know, from the front, and I can do that. You have to be careful of portraiture in that situation, because people will say, I don't know that person, right? So I do want that to be anonymous. That's one of the reasons why I keep the faces out. There's one, I call it Dances with Birds. That's not actually the type, but you can see a little bit of that individual space. Yeah. Other questions? That's on here. It's just.
So you said that you create colors by glazing, say green by glazing blue and yellow. Do you also mix on your palette?
To some degree. And that kind of painting is what I would call prima painting, where you really direct mixing, and that's what also plein air painters do. They mix the color and then put it on. And you'll see that a little bit more in the timelines. But these paintings are pretty directly painted with the color as it comes out of the tube. What I will do is add white or gray to mute the color. So I'll mute it. And then there are times when I will, mix the primaries together to get a particular hue that I want to push into the sky. But I'm pretty direct. I'm pretty old school when I apply the color.
So instead of mixing on your palette, you layer them to make shade.
Yes. So my palette stays pretty original to the color that's put down. I'm trying to think. I do mix the cerulean with some yellow now and then, so it leans more to the green. But I'm trying to think of the other colors I mix together. I'll mix quinacridone red and crimson red with asphaltum to get a really deep brown that has a little translucency to it. That's about all I mix. Everything else is pretty directly painted, scumbled, glazed, and then subtracted.
Have you ever used any of the Gamblin Portland grays?
I do. I love Portland grays. And so what she asked about Gamlin's Portland gray. I'll repeat the question just so everybody can hear it. I like the Portland grays, and those are the primary grays, but I was using the turret grays that they put out every year, but they are always different. So one year, it's a great gray, and the other year it's a terrible gray. I'll try to get as many tubes of it as I can, but now I stick with the Portland grays. Gamlin's a great company. Well, back when they were owned by the Gamlins, it was really fun when they were starting out, and they were purchased by somebody else. They were still great. Other questions?
Oh, no, I was scratching.
What? Yes.
Can you define stumbling?
Scumbling, yes. So a couple different ways of painting directly, those kind of direct brush strokes that I was talking about with the kind of impressionist approach. Glazing, which is to take these thin layers of paint and pretty much push them on, wipe them back, leave them where you want them to have the greatest influence, but they will settle in, even microscopically, they'll settle into the brush strokes. So the cool thing about glazing, and this is where the tonalists come in, is it unifies the piece. If you haven't tried this before, you've got a painting that isn't working. The colors are off, and you can't figure it out. Just take a yellow. My favorite yellow to do this with is it's a Gamblin earth yellow, oxide yellow, fully translucent. The color it's closest to is yellow ochre in other palettes. Mix it with glaze so there's almost no color and paint it over your whole painting and watch what happens. It'll have this unifying effect, and that's what the tonalists did. They did everything else everybody else did, and then they just did these unifying layers of paint. Now, if there's a little too much of it in an area, you take your brush, instead of painting this way, wipe it clean and push it across the painting. And the bristles of the brush will pick up most of the paint you don't want. Wipe it and keep doing that and sculpt your painting. Now you're sculpting, not painting. Scumbling is then taking a very direct paint. Whether you mix it on the palette or whether you paint it directly on a fairly dry, usually a hog's hair brush, a little bit of that paint, and you lightly drag it so that it hits the high points of the painting, the brush strokes. If it's a canvas has the little dips where the fibers are, and it'll just hit those things. And what it will do is have the same effect as glazing, and then it will unify. All of these paintings have scumbled areas. When you get close after my definition, you'll be able to absolutely see where I've done that here. And definitely here. And if you look at this painting, you're gonna see just within that shrubbery, about 6 different colors that were scumbled in and then subtracted back out using that method I talked about, where you wipe the brush and you push. You don't pull, you push that. Scumbling is then pulling it back down through. So you're not painting this buttery paint with brush strokes. You're dabbing sort of over the top. All the tricks of the trade. Other questions? Some of these paintings are more subtracted than they are additive. So I've left this because I like the way it works, but you can almost see the original sketch underneath here where I've sanded that back out. You can even see some of my compositional lines. One thing that I do with the figure paintings is I do compose them mathematically. So they do, some of them are composed to the golden mean or some sort of root rectangle. And that is a mathematical equation of breaking down space so that it's repetitive. So that one rectangle is repeated in a smaller rectangle, folded into another rectangle until a focal point is established. All of the paintings are done that way, but these tend to be more formula in the placement of the figure as they break down. So I do paint my thirds, but I also paint using root rectangles, especially the figure pieces. They have to be thought through and composed very directly ahead of time. The landscapes I kind of work as I move through. If you look carefully on a lot of these landscapes, you're going to see some traces of trees that I eliminated. They're in there. You'll see them kind of hidden underneath a few layers of paint.
Well, I just noticed that the two paintings in the middle with the light frames, the figures are in the exact same, or not exact, but
Yeah.
they're close to the same pose. And yeah, one
Oh,
of the
yeah,
birds
these
is flying away and one of the birds is coming in.
Yep, you'll see that, and you'll see my archers.
And
These are, yeah, so this is the only narrative I really offer is in the title, but carries were birds that were birds, tree mean birds. They're actually people birds, and so some of these do have things that appear to be a little violent. This figure definitely has a pistol formed out of the hand, and it's Heracles or Hercules. Again, there were some birds in the myth that were terrorizing the countryside, and for peace of mind, Heracles dealt with that. Yes, I repeated those two figures, and then my archers here, Artemis and Apollo, who were twins, and I think the children of Zeus, and they were the god and goddess of archery, but also of animals and a lot of good things, archery, music. Almost all of these are Greek, except this piece here, dances with birds, and that's Kinara, and that is a Hindu or Buddhist god. And the Kinara were kind of bird people, and they were affiliated with music and poetry and health and happiness. In fact, all of these paintings have some aspect to them of somebody doing something good for mankind from some Greek tradition. With one exception over here, which is our transition piece, and it's Christina of the Valley. If you're familiar with Christina and Wyeth's piece, that's my version. And Christina had polio when she was young, and other diseases that eventually killed her, but she thrived. And in spite of those disabilities, she had a fabulous life, and Wyeth really admired her. And I think she's subject to a number of his paintings. That's the only exception, and that's why it's over there. Any questions?
Are you gonna speak to the abstract?
Sure. I can do that for those who want to talk about it. I'll give you a little background on it. So, at the end of the day, I've got the extra paint, and so I have to get rid of it. I can either put it in garbage, and it's wonderful value of paint, and it will likely start a fire because there's linseed oil in it. Or I can move it onto a structure. And so what I start doing is I start wiping that paint, and it's a great end of the day because I'm in a compositional mode anyway. I've been working out these problems with these paintings. And so I start composing with the color. And there are layers and layers upon layers of paint that come off the palette after I've done these. And but what's interesting is the compositional approach to that is exactly the same as these other pieces. So I did I mentioned that those were my step into the modern world or the modernism. They're really not modernist pieces though, other than they need explanation. But they are composed with the minimal palette and they are timelines. So they represent a period of time that I painted with that palette and written into those pieces. Sometimes you'll find some poetry. It might be a lyric to a song that's particularly poetic. It might have been playing while I was working the piece. But they all fall into that same idea of addition and subtraction, composition, form above everything. And in fact, those are the rawest versions of form, because there isn't any narrative or anything you can attach to that from reality. There isn't a hidden still life or a landscape in there. They're complete figments of my imagination, but they are painted in the same way.
Does creating them feel like the end of a linear process?
Yeah.
Does it feel close to?
It's close the loop, and that's why they're called timelines, and you'll even see some timeline written into it. Yeah, and they're really more for my kids, my family to just kind of have as journals of the work. There I go feeding my narcissism right there. You caught me. I shouldn't want to. Other questions? About process or technique? You got everything you need? Well, how about this? We'll adjourn. I think we have 15 more minutes. If you have a piece you want to talk about or you're curious about, it's got something in it that's perplexing, let's talk about it. I'll tell you exactly how I did it. How's that? That gives me all of the